Howdy, folks. Welcome to the data presentation for the Wixoss Summer Ceremony, hosted, as of recording, 3 weeks ago. I'm your host for today, Travis, aka Hellfire, and I am joined with both Andrew and Tiffany of Life Burst Podcast. How are you guys doing today?
Hello!
Hello! Thank you so much for having us on. This is really cool.
I love having you guys. Like, I love your guys' work, so I figured you guys would be perfect for talking about the data numbers, and I know you guys played in it as well, so there's things you could probably yell at me for if I misstate, because I only get to see the matches I chose to commentate today. You guys got to see everything completely different than what I did. So
yeah, we were in the trenches for sure.
Yeah, in the thick of it, as it were.
So we're going to go straight into the details here. We got your top 3 decks for the ceremony. We've got, leading off the pack, Lion decks at 25 total showings, Hirana decks at 23, and last but not least, Nova decks at 18. Now, with all the talk about Nova, I expected it to be higher. I don't know about you guys, considering everybody seemed to be like, oh, Nova's like really good, I want to play Nova, or I think this is going to be the best deck for it, where Lion coming out at the top is, I'm guessing, is a more perceived favorable matchup at the time, considering the time we had to actually figure out what is the stronger deck to play.
Yeah. I think that's true. So I did play quite a bit of card jockey in my going up to 5th place with Nova, and I went into the ceremony thinking that Nova was not favored. I think I've changed my tune, and I think Nova's slightly more favored. I think it's a better matchup for the aggro player than the no limit player, but I think that. One of the other things that was maybe held to card jockey's just popularity for this one, was the fact that card jockey is a bit of a known quantity too. So if you're worried about shipping or you're worried about testing time, knowing exactly this is how this deck runs and this is probably what I should buy to upgrade the deck is a good move to do in the short term.
Mm-hmm.
And the same can also be said about Hirana decks. Hiranas are very straightforward. Let me slam these Lancelots and Romeos, clear your board, early turns, and then finish you off with Glory Grow at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been very consistent over the past couple sets.
Yeah, that's probably a lot of the appearance here is just a familiarity. You know, it's already a high performing deck, and that it's the old reliable. It's like, oh, I want to play this, but if not, I'm just going to pull out old reliable Hirana. Here we go.
That's kind of how I think of it too.
Brain off, head empty, red cards go burr. This isn't Magic. It's not red spells. It's just red cards.
Yeah.
So outside of the top 3, we have 9 Musica decks, 8 Madoka decks, along with 8 Ray decks, 6 Tamago decks, 5 Wolf decks, 4 Sangha, 3 Bang, Dream Team specifically Bang, not Uchu Bang. Dream Team Bang had a lot better representation than actual Bang. 2 Akinos, and following at 1 apiece, we have at Umaru, Love It, Akino, and just Team Uchu Bang with 1, which...
I really hope I would love to take credit for the Dream Team Bang, because I know that it runs a lot of red, and that was a thing that I was on the podcast very adamant about. Like, I enjoyed this deck, and I actually think it's a pretty good one. Mm-hmm. Although it's not complete credit taken. I was given that idea by one of our commenters, and I ran with it. Yeah. But it is very cool to see that the Bang Dream Team was not necessarily a meme team and was actually getting used.
Mm-hmm. So it's also always great to see Ancient Surprise make a little comeback. I've actually found that the Ancient Surprise decks tend to do You know what? They kind of hold their own in the
Yeah.
ceremony. It's a little bit of a dark horse, I
It's
guess.
a bit of an ancient surprise.
It's a bit of a surprise. But what I thought was really interesting is seeing a card jockey wolf. I actually played against one of those. And it's really interesting to see that people decided to go with that this time.
Yeah, I think we can talk more about that when you give us the numbers and we dive into Wolf. But Wolf is an interesting deck.
I honestly thought the same thing about Sangha. So when I saw a Sangha at the top tables, personally, I'm just like, excuse me, my notes are wrong. I like being proven wrong. Let's look at this matchup.
I agree. It was cool.
And the other thing too, and it's just a little snippet to when we do discuss the total numbers and stuff. I can only do one of the 3 slides for Bang because of how everything was all over the board, but the main decks are consistent. That is for certain.
Cool.
Which, with those numbers, we're going to start it off with the poster child of Diva, Hirana.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, we're going to go through a full snippet of what all these numbers are going to mean when we start going through them. I'm going to show the top 5 main deck cards for any centers that we cover, as long as they have at least more than 4 decks, just because the numbers show a little more consistency versus, like, Akina only has 2 decks, so she won't have any slides here. I'll show the top assists for both decks, the level 1 and the level 2, and what their top pieces are. So when it comes to the numbers as well, the way to read it is I'm going to show the percentages of how often they appeared in decks and the average amount of copies. A lot of times, if you see it closer to 4, you can safely assume for deck building purposes. If you haven't experimented with these teams, you can run 4 copies of this card and be fine. There are probably some cases where you only want to use 3, but if it errs towards one number, chances are it's probably safer to have that number, that total number, versus you can't have 65 of a card in your deck.
Yeah.
That's not how this works.
The rule of thumb I always use with deck building is if I want to see it as much as possible, I run a 4 of. If I want to see it some amount in the late game, I run 2 or 4 of, or 2 or 3 of. And if I really only ever want to dig for it and find myself a copy because it's like a silver bullet in a matchup, that's when you run a 1 of.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean you don't want to see your 1-ofs in your opening hand like I do?
Yeah.
But anyway, so top 5 main deck cards for Hirana. We have Deafening Inferno at the front of the pack in all of the decks at 3.87 copies a deck. Following that up is Lancelot in all decks as well, at 3.65 copies a deck on average. In 21 of the decks, we have Rose Quartz, and that is at 3.5, just a little over 3.5 copies a deck. 4th place, we've got Nova in 21 of the decks as well at 2.1 copies a deck. And last but not least, Zhao Yun in 18 of the decks at 3.39 copies on average per deck. If I remember from the last data presentation, I don't have it pulled up right now, Romeo got replaced out in this top 5.
Yeah, that is literally the surprising thing that I'm thinking. You know, we call it the Trinity Red, and that's Deafening Inferno, Lancelot, and then Rommel. So seeing the Zhao Yun increase would lead me to believe that people either A, were thinking they'd run into walls more, so they took out the Rommels, or B, were thinking they were really going to run into No Limit a ton, and the Zhao Yun is good specifically against the No Limit.
Well, not just No Limit, Card Jockey and Diagram decks, because you can't neg the power on it, and Card Jockey can use Romails and Deafening, basically can use what Hirana can use in terms of removal, because they have access to red.
I mean, Zhao Yun is always it's a great pick especially in an opening hand. It's really hard to deal with until you get into like turn 2 to 2.5. So if you are running any sort of like white Larig in your deck, it's really not a bad option.
Yeah, it's a very sticky chump blocker.
It's sticky. Yeah,
Right.
that's how I would describe that.
If they can't get rid of it with if they can't get rid of it with a Signy or if they can't get rid of it with a spell or a Larig, chances are they're either going to have to kill it off their own or it's just going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it for the top 5 cards for Hirana. The assists are next, and it's a shame that these aren't one higher because that's about the most cemented deck or assists I've ever seen. We have Akino Rock in 22 of the decks, as well as Akino Bye Bye in 22 of the decks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do recall seeing one deck using Clap, and I can't remember what the other level 1 assist is for Akino that people would use, because I'm so used to seeing Rock that I forget the others.
Yeah,
Right.
I actually am in the same boat. When in deck building, I always put Akino Rock and Akino Bye Bye, and I know Clap exists, but I never default to it.
I think a lot of it's the guard recursion that Bye Bye can give you. It's like, if you're just like, I don't have a guard in my hand. Hey, I can put a guard in my hand. This is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Bouncing is very good against Nova walls. That's
Right.
also a big part of it.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Literally.
Literally.
So, and I thought, for the Ray assists, personally from the Hirana decks I did see, I thought these numbers would be a little more different, but I only got to see 7 matches, not 117 decks at the time. So, leading off for the level 1 assist for Ray, we have Flashblade in 17 of the decks. I thought this next one was going to be Divine Majesty, but I was wrong. It's Empty Blade, which, understandable to a degree in 15 of the decks. So there is a lot more variation for the level 2. It seems there is a lot more variation for the level 2s for Ray than there is for Akino, just because Ray actually does have a lot of good options, in all honesty.
Yeah, it's a flexible L rig. But I'm actually not utterly surprised to see Flashblade followed by Empty Blade. The more and more I played the Nova and No Limit matchup, the more and more it was like, you just need a little bit of draw against Nova to have a fighting chance.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Not to mention, with Empty Blade, sometimes it's nice to kind of cut down your opponent's opportunities that they have in their hand while you're bulking up your own. You know, anytime that you have some sort of like red burn, sometimes you just want a little bit of card draw so you can either find that extra burn, or particularly in Hirana, especially when you're maybe running like a Kagetsuchi, you want to have a little bit extra in your hand to discard for bigger and badder effects.
Yeah, specifically that Nobunaga tech, right? Your data showed that Nobunaga is run as a 2 of in pretty much all decks. That's the correct number. You want to see it in the late game, but you don't want to see it so much because it's useless at certain times.
Yeah,
So,
if you don't have something to put it over, it's a dead card.
Yeah.
but in some matchups, it is the card that you need to win. Like, it's just the out.
Yeah, it can vanish and it has double crush. Like, what more do you want?
Yep, and Empty Blade will find it for you. So I'm actually not surprised to see these numbers.
Yeah, these are solid choices.
Right. And now we're going to go on to the pieces for Hirana. As always, if you're playing No Limit, I don't need to say what the number is. We already know this card is at 100% in 100% of the decks.
It would be bold to do otherwise.
If
If it was under 100%, I would have asked for the deck list because I want to know what No Limit's not running Glory Go.
I would almost be willing to bet it's a case of I don't have the starter deck if that was the case.
Yeah.
And then from the last ceremony, I know it was go to the top. This time, it's Xenocluster.
Yeah.
But in only 10 of the decks. This was the highest placing second piece for Hirana decks. So
That's an interesting figure. I am I think it's I think it might even be a correct figure. Xenocluster should be played higher than what people are playing it at. But seeing it in No Limit is interesting. Either they were attacking against getting Go to the top, or they were really respecting the fact that discard is a serious thing in this format now.
Yeah, like, for example, the Nova matchup that we constantly keep going back to. Fenrir's trigger Xenocluster, Random Drains trigger Xenocluster. It's like, oh, cool, you're gonna go for Hanpanai on your level 3 turn while I still have this unrevealed. Sure, Fenrir is going to trigger my Xenocluster, and now the odds of you getting the cards that I need in my hand out are a lot lower now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you follow the flow of the game, right? Turn 3 is when right before No Limit trying to kill you off. No Limit's trying to kill you off turn 4 latest, right? So if I turn 3 and I put down, and I'm like, all right, it's time to go for the discard, and I go for the discard, and then use Xenocluster to draw a couple cards back, right? Now you have the raw drawn cards to potentially come back and go, Eternal Influence, remove one of your things, bounce with an Akino bye-bye. I've got my Nobunaga that I drew off of this Xenocluster, I win the game.
Yeah.
Basically, right. And
Yeah,
that's
again,
also
just
assuming
putting that burn back in your hand.
Right. And that's also assuming that, you don't get end of the turn on your Eternal Influence. But that's going to be a given for any kind of Exceed spell. You just hope that your opponent decides to say, you can pay the Exceed cost. It's fine.
Yeah.
Morgan Freeman voice. You'll soon find out it was not fine. So continuing on with the No Limit team, obviously we're gonna skip Akino here, go straight to Ray. For Ray, we have in our top 5 main deck, leading off the pack, Regalicus in all of the decks at almost 4 copies each, just a little shy. Also in all of the decks, actually re-looking at these numbers, it's a pretty even spread. Also in all of the decks, Firefly Squid at, again, almost 4 copies a deck, just 3 3/4. In 8 of the decks, we have Thrilling at roughly 2.5 copies, which I agree with, considering it's you want the discard more so than you want the draw 3. The draw 3 is a bonus after your once per game, mostly. Afterwards, Gagiel in 7 of the decks at almost 4 copies each as well. And last but not least, Lancelot in 7 of the decks at almost 3.5 copies as well. Oh, hey, I forgot to put that. That Thrilling should say 100%, but hey, sometimes you misread things. But the Lancelot here actually doesn't surprise me.
Also true, yeah. I have found that you've basically just identified the core of Ray. It is a Firefly Squid deck. That's what you want to do. You're looking to enable Firefly Squid. You're running red, so you're running some amount of Lancelots. Even the 3 basically copies per deck seems right, because you have so much raw draw power in that deck. You're gonna always have a Lancelot when you need it.
Right, and this is. I don't have the rest of the numbers up before. I feel like the other level 2 option that people would probably go for would be the Hijikatas, just because it's like, hey, I can get over some walls, potentially some level 2 walls, and force you to get rid of cards in your hand, which is both a plus.
Yeah, this spread doesn't exactly surprise me. All of these cards play very well together, and Lancelot is just a really reliable form of removal, and you can pay for it with anything. So it's not like splashing it's going to be detrimental to your blue balance.
Yeah, I'm more interested in what our next ceremony is going to show for Ray, because Ray looked like it had a good showing, and I think we'll see more Rays as they are perceived as the Nova killers.
Right. And I think the same can go for a couple other decks too, and we'll go over those later. Just as kind of like an informal, like, hey, if you want to counter this deck, this is probably what you should do. So going on to the assists, in all of the decks, we're just going to speed through these front two anyways. We already know it's Akino Rock, and we got Akino Bye-Bye. 8 of the decks for Akino Rock.
Yeah.
7 of the decks for Bye-Bye. I think that other deck, the one other deck was Clap. Not entirely sure. Don't have the numbers up, as always. But, honestly, like, these are really good assists. There's no reason not to.
This Ray is the only no-limit deck that I would say, yeah, Clap could probably be fine.
Probably. With the amount of draw power you have, I don't think Servant draw is much of an issue if that's what you're running Bye-Bye for, but... Or the Servant salvage, for the most part. But it also depends if you're more worried about opening up a slot for your pushback on the next turn versus... I don't remember what Clap does. Hold on, give me a second.
It is enter target Signy in your opponent's field gains. The Signy cannot attack until end of turn. Enter pay 2 colorless. If it's your opponent's turn, target Signy on your field gains constant. The Signy cannot be vanished until end of turn, and it costs 1.
Yeah,
it's just more of a defensive interruption.
Yeah, it's very defensive.
That's not bad. It's a way to keep maybe a Firefly Squid or something on your field if you know your opponent can kill it off. So that way you can just keep applying that pressure. And then onto the Hirana section of the assists. There's only 2 to go over. It's On Stage and Stamp. Those were the only 2 that appeared in any of the Ray decks.
Yeah, these are
solid choices.
These are the clear winners. There's not much to talk about here. They just do the job of opening up lanes and allowing you to attack on your next turn. So it's defensive and aggressive at the same time.
They do what Hirana does best.
I don't want to think. I just want to attack.
Yeah.
It's very on character for how she's represented in the show.
It is.
If anyone watches the anime.
And if you haven't, you probably should. Wink, wink.
Wink, wink.
Show's good. If you like fun, fluffy stuff, show's good. But that's not what we're here for. We're here for numbers. I could go all day about talk about anime. So let's not. So on to the pieces. Again, I don't need to say any more.
No surprises there.
No surprise. And the second piece, Song of Wixoss, which this is a bit of a pet card personally, and I'll mention it again later. I feel like if you run blue and you have a choice, if you run a blue Larig and you have a choice between this and Chime, if you're not using this, something's wrong, in my opinion.
Crazy Dog. Song of Wixoss is very powerful. It's just a very powerful card in general. And I'm actually surprised to see it at 75%. It feels like it's the right move to run Song of Wixoss in Ray. It powers up your once-a-game ability if you need to do it that, and it also just gives you so much raw card draw on your opponent's turn, mind you, after they've usually done some amount of discarding. So you don't really need to run Xenocluster with this. It's basically Xenocluster.
Right, and even if they don't force discard, it's... The way I look at Song of Wixoss, especially with the Ray decks, is I'm going to once per game. I have nothing in my hand that I want to play to the field anyways. I'm going to once per game, and then I'm going to Song of Wixoss to maybe see if there's something... I draw something that I do want to play to the field. Or... Like you said, it's like, oh, cool, you just depleted my hand, Song of Wixoss. I don't have to discard till the end of my turn. I'll be fine.
Yep, exactly.
Now, this might just be me not remembering the Madoka very well, but I feel like this could be good in Madoka decks as well, but...
I think it's the enter that they're worried about, and that's the reason why they might want to play Xenocluster in Madoka instead. But you're saying in replace of Chime. Yeah. The funny thing is, I think people and your data might support this later. I think people are moving away from Chime in Madoka decks.
I know there's a deck later down the line that I think has that I know. I don't think I have it showed here. It will be in the spreadsheet that I'll post at the in the description below. It shows all the data, all the deck lists, stuff like that. That Chime was a really considered piece, even though they had access to blue, which personally confuses me, just because this is
it's Hijikata, right? You're doing it as an easy way to turn on.
I knew there was a card I was forgetting. Hijikata. Okay.
But it's easy mode to turn on Hijikata. But people have actually been leading a little bit of way of Chime in Madoka, specifically because with Gagiel and the Regiclisses, and now also Thrilling, it's easier to turn on your Hijikatas than it was set ago.
Right. But we'll continue on. Now moving on to the head of the pack, Lion.
I got the joke.
Oh.
I tried. But
well done.
So, top 5 main cards for Hirana is, from what I remember, it's the same core that you'll see for any Lion deck. Have PRJ leading it out in all of the decks at almost 4 copies each. Followed up by Zhao Yun in 24 of the decks at almost, again, 4 copies each. Followed Haniel in 3rd in 24 of the decks at almost 4 copies each. Yeah, there's a pattern here. Continuing Arquin in 24 of the decks at just under 3.5, roughly more that 3 number. And red deck does red. We have Lancelot in here in 23 of the decks at almost 3.5 copies each as well. Just like the raid numbers before, this is basically your Lion core. The other 5 cards is just to try and get to that endless punchline consistency or whatever tech pieces you need for disruption purposes.
I specifically love the data supporting that Lancelot is just this 5th wheel that's showing up in everyone's deck. And they're like, you're looking at this core plan, and then Lancelot's like, hey, what's up? I'm Raw Power. How you doing?
How do you do, fellow kids?
That's so true.
It's like, you know that one guy, he's friends with literally everyone. He seems to know everyone. That's just Lancelot.
That's just Lancelot, yeah.
Have red Will Lancelot.
No, I think the real thing is people are just trying to find an excuse to throw Lancelots in their deck to make these Lancelot promos a lot more enticing.
Look, man, once we get
Don't call me out like that.
Yeah, right? Once we get to the Bang Dream Team, I mean, literally that's the reason. It's like, yeah, Bang's cool, but what if we added Lancelot?
It's like, this deck is cool, but what if we added Lancelot? There's not really much else to talk about
this
with
spread is it's really consistent. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't run a Lion deck any other way. Not to mention, this has been pretty much the same lineup for the past, several sets that we've had come out. Especially with the Zhao Yun. Again, it's just like, it's a solid get it in your first hand, sticky Signy. Right. And then Haniel, of course, is a really good digger, as well as that life burst is impeccable.
Yeah, I think there's probably some amount of data to show that Ishikiri Maru and Komai have places in this deck as well, to a lesser extent, but this really does show that this is the core of the deck. This is what does the most of the digging. The other stuff is all nice to add to the deck and a cool slight upgrade, but this is just the part that's going to stay the same.
Right. That's about as standard as you get, considering, there's not really much. Considering the last couple sets, Lion itself hasn't gotten much upgrades to begin with, because you're so focused on I want to thin my deck as much as possible to hit that 3 or spell when I endless punchline.
Yeah, for sure. And these cards are the best way to do it.
Right.
Not to mention the starter decks themselves were pretty solid to begin with. So it's just, it's a solid deck, performs well, and we'll probably see a couple upgrades in the future.
Right. So, on to the assists for Lion. We have, similar to the Akino, Rock Bye-Bye standard package, just about the standard package for any deck that doesn't have Love It as a center. We have Scratch in 22 of the decks, which my view is skewed because I'm used to seeing Scratch X2, and Crossfade in also 22 of the decks. Which, honestly, it might have just been the matchups I've seen with Scratch X2. I managed to find all the decks that had Scratch X2, or
Yeah.
all I play against is that. But I feel like that would be a lot more, what's the word? Prevalent, considering we're going to go back to that Nova matchup talk point where it's a great early play aggression. You can clear out, your opponent can't do anything about a double crush at turn 1.
You know, what's interesting is in the content creation sphere, people who love Scratch X2, aka I just drop them, Replay Works, right? They love Scratch X2. People who don't like Scratch X2, namely me, in the Like First podcast, I really don't like it. It's a polarized card, and I don't think I think I give Scratch X2 a bad rap. But it is better in some matchups than it is in others. Scratch is just kind of this standby and will always be a not too many eggs in one basket type of card.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Whereas Scratch X2, if you give something double crush and it's like you get Nova muted, for example, or it's just past turn 1 and they've got level 2 assists ready to go now, it can just blow back on you real hard.
Right. That is fair. That is fair.
It's also a very aggressive assist for a deck like Lion. Lion has a little bit of flexibility in its tempo, I guess you could say. But overall, like if you're going up against Harana for no limit, and you have like Scratch X2, honestly, I probably would have preferred to have just a regular Scratch because it's just a little bit more defensive and it has a little bit more reach than trying to outpace a deck like Harana.
Yeah,
I hope that makes sense.
Well, the discard's
Yeah,
a real
makes
cost.
sense.
Yeah, but it's just that it's Scratch X2 is good in some matchups, and I'm not sure the meta is kind to it right now. But it's when it's good, it's good.
That is fair. So continuing on to the Wolf assists, leading out Laser, how you get your resources in 17 of the decks, and overtaking, I think it was Mirage for the level 2 assist of choice. We have the newly released Reverb in 15 of the decks for Lion, and I honestly haven't played with Lion yet because, let's face it, all I ever play is Uchu. I'm not going to lie about that. All I ever play is Uchu because it seems fitting that the data guy plays the team that is known for, data. But,
Data analyzing, yeah.
That's cute.
I do kind of like it. It's somewhat cheaper than Mirage. I think Mirage is what, a 4 cost?
Yes.
4 or 5?
Well,
like
it has a flexible cost. It's 3 cost to vanish, but it's an unconditional vanish, and then
Right.
4 to stop something from hitting you.
Right. So it's a little cheaper than the prior assist, but on top of the pay 1, stop a damage is just really good, honestly. And since you're already burning through, I know line decks are already burning through a lot of their resources just for the deck filtering. This helps.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The number that actually surprises me in all of this is how is 25% of the Lion decks not running Laser? That's the one that surprises me because Laser helps its game plan, right? It filters and you put level 1 white Signy into the enter zone for you, plus it enter charges, and it's a deck that needs the enter.
Right. Honestly, don't have an answer for that because, like I said, I don't play card jockey. It does that numbers do surprise me as well, to say the least. It's just like I don't because like you said, I agree. I don't particularly understand why you wouldn't use it because of the deck thinning, but I could somewhat see an argument for Q. I know I did see Q a couple times.
Yeah,
that's the only other level 1 assist you have an option to. So yeah, there is an argument for Q.
Well, I feel like it kind of depends on, what kind of speed the card jockey player would want to go with. I think that this kind of shows that people would probably want to play a little bit more of a mid-range Lion, which I think would be the best idea considering the likely meta that they were going to go up against. But going back to what I said earlier with Scratch ×2 being a little bit more aggressive, some of the other wolf options are a little bit more aggressive as well, such as Q being Vanish, target Signy with power 7,000 or more for a level 1 grow. That can be really aggressive. You can wipe out your opponent's board pretty much on turn 2 with Scratch ×2 and Wolf Q. So I think it really just depends on the player if they wanted to be way more aggressive with their Lion than usual. That would be my guess.
It's true. We are entering a world where a level 1 7,000 power is actually not that unlikely.
Looking at you, Typo. And Hypnos and Kogitsune Maru.
Yeah. And Melissa over there crying in a corner that she's like, I was the first one to do it, level 1.
Miji who? But with that aside, on to the pieces. This number surprises me. Endless Punchline. 24 of 25.
Oh.
What?
Yeah.
What?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I am thoroughly flabbergasted. What else could that have been?
Just straight up courage.
A good... Yeah. Out of all the pieces I've seen card jockey with, I don't know what could replace it. I really don't. It's just so key for the game plan, but...
It's the reason you run the deck.
It's a team piece.
Speaking of fun numbers, on a tangent, so last ceremony, somebody hit me with the 3 servants in a deck, which, okay, fine. Shout outs to the Lion player with 2 servants.
Oh!
I wish I had that kind of confidence.
That Lion is the Lion that also played the one that's the Vanish, Wolf. And was like, no, I'm here to attack. I'm not here to guard.
Oof.
I'm just... I was looking... I had to double take the deck list, and when I had Andrew from Replay double check all my data entries, we're the only 2 that had the access to the deck list for the time being. He said it was right. I checked it the 3rd time.
Yeah.
It was right. There were only 2 servants in that pile of 40. So...
Wow.
Shout outs to the Lion player who did that. Like, I'm waiting for next ceremony. There's going to be somebody that goes, maybe I should try this with 1 servant.
Yeah.
Please don't. God. Please don't. No, I don't. I've already got enough gray hairs as it is. I don't need any more looking at this stuff.
It's the one Nova player that's like, I'm going to see this every game. It's fine.
We heavily recommend you play 4 guards in your deck always.
At least right now, yeah.
At least right now.
The life burst is just too good, but we're on to the pieces. And then such a wide variety of a second piece for Lion that the second highest piece, end of the turn, only 9 decks.
Wow.
Not surprising.
It isn't surprising to me. There's so many pieces that could be a good choice for decks like Lion. But end of turn also does not particularly surprise me. In fact, I think that we might see it a little bit more coming up in the future.
I have a hot take, and you can watch the episode. I do the hot take on our podcast when we talk about the metagame for 2, and we talk about 3, and we talk about what happened at the ceremony. And I say that I actually don't like end of turn in card jockey because I think it's a defensive piece and not an aggressive piece, and I think card jockey wants a more aggressive piece. But this is not surprising to me. End of turn has actually turned out to be a lot better than I thought it would be. I'm coming from the Nova experience over here, where
Right.
it was, and I'm certain as soon as we get to Nova, we'll find out End of Turn is the best piece for that deck.
I really like End of the Turn because coming from the other game I play, I'm pretty sure I've said this multiple times before on like my blog and I think maybe a couple videos I've been in. Like the other game I play is Wixoss. We value consistency. Anything that can give us consistency to like give a Weiss player consistency their game plan, they will take. Like end of the turn, just like I don't care that you're using spells. This card reads, grab one of your end game pieces and put it back in your hand from your trash. That's the only thing I read on this card. And with only, I think there's only a handful of cards in the game that actually let you get things back from your trash. Like, I know Servant's one with their Life Burst. Black has some stuff.
Yeah, but the card jockey specifically, not a lot of ways to do it.
No.
Right. Card jockey, the only options they have for any kind of things is go to the top with a search or end of the turn with a salvage. That's it. I mean, card jockey has a little more consistency considering they have all their filter options. Just like, I'm just going to burn through my deck as fast as possible, get the pieces I need when I need them, and if I have to refresh, I have the tools to get the piece I need. So, but with it only being, there was a really good turnout of array, not a turnout, but an array of pieces that Lion could use that honestly, it's no surprise, to say the least.
Yeah, I think it really just depends on the type of player you prefer to be for a deck like Lion, and kind of what suits you best for your play style. But definitely, the second choice on end of turn is not something to sleep on.
Right. So reaching the, well, not halfway point. Sorry, I'm looking a little farther in my notes. So on to Wolf for the top 5 main deck cards that we have. Opening out with Good Dig in 4 of the Wolf decks at 4 copies each. Osagitsune in second in 4 of the decks at 3 copies each. Map in 3 of the decks at 4 copies each. Parajulice, breaking the chain of nice even numbers for total numbers of copies per decks in 3 of the decks in 3.67 copies on average, and a Signy with no abilities but cute nonetheless, Pandata, in 3 of the decks at 3 and long 3 number copies.
Yeah, 353. You know, I am. I know you said Pandata's got no abilities on it.
Sorry, it can be got 2 different colors. Forgive me.
No. I think it's got a specific ability that you're overlooking here, which is it's a Terra Beast, and that is important in this type of deck because this deck is the deck that's most likely to use some amount of Terra Beast shenanigans.
Right. That's right. Wolf decks. Wolf is easier to do the Terra Beast package because you can spend 1 turn at your level 3 not having to worry about having like 2 copies of Buffalo on the field because of Wolf's on-enter ability of just being a 5k everything.
Yep. Yeah, the data here is not too surprising other than projection map. Projection map is difficult to play in Wolf because Wolf tends to be more red and green oriented. Right. The Good Dig is not surprising either because Good Dig is one of the few ways that Wolf gets access to filtering for its Endless Punchline.
That is true. I mean, Personally, considering like you said before, the amount of red and green, I honestly thought Miracle Draw might be better, but
Well, don't sleep on Good Dig's life burst ability, which is filtering as well.
Not to mention, since you're in Card Jockey, you don't really care because you look at 7, add 2 anything versus look at 5, add 1 anything.
Yeah.
Unless you exceed 4 and then watch it get end of the turn. But it's about. I would say this is also outside of the Pure J map, probably the core for a Wolf deck.
Yeah, I think the map might be a little misleading, but because specifically, just so you guys know, the viewers, map can only grab, aside from spells, it can only grab white Signy, and the deck doesn't run a ton of white Signy.
It's probably more so there for the guard tax than anything.
Yeah, and that is where it specifically shines, because Wolf is one of the few decks where you are often going to be able to put up upwards to 6 damage, threaten 6 damage on the field in one turn.
Right. Buffalo's ability on top of Endless Punchline, right?
I have to wonder what amount, and this is your segue. I gotta wonder how much they decided to run with Love It Mix instead of Love It Crossfade. So that. There's your perfect segue.
Well, fun thing. You're about to find out. We got Lion Dig for number 1 level 1 line assist in 4 of the decks, followed by Build Up in only 3 of the decks.
Build Up's crazy, but sure, yeah, go for it, guys.
I don't play Card Jockey. I don't have anything to say, but Scratch in all of the decks. Scratch is good. Scratch is good. And then, well, sorry to disappoint you. Crossfade, 4 decks.
Got it. Yeah, I like in this deck specifically because of the enter that it can get a hold of. I actually like Mix better. Mix, by the way, is the one that vanishes a level 8,000, or sorry, a power 8,000 or less, and then gives something Assassin and gives something Lancer. It's one of the ways that you go Endless Punchline, love it, Mix. I'm threatening 6 damage. What do you want to do? It's turn 3. It's like horrifying for the other player. But Crossfade perfectly works here too, because it's got an ability that's pretty costly, and again, Wolf gets a bunch of enter, so it can pay for Crossfade. The Lion buildup is the most surprising for me. I understand the Lion Dig because it is another way to filter in a deck that lacks great filtering. But Lion buildup, I suppose it's an attack phase timing type of thing, where it's like one of your few ways that you can get yourself some defense against the aggression that you're looking to face against. Mid-range decks tend to not necessarily do well against aggro, because they're taking some time to build up their board state, and aggro just sort of kills them before it.
I think the idea for build up is it's one of those it's similar to Madoka Clap in a sense of it's got 3 abilities and you can pay for them if you can afford it. Considering, like you said, Wolf does build up a lot of enter. So you have the ability to pay 6. I thought that was 5 at first. No, that's 6. The pay 6 to trash something on the field. Or it's just this one thing's not going to attack. I need some extra filtering. Pay this 2 whites and Miracle Draw. That's basically what it is. It's Miracle Draw.
Still, paying 6 is a lot.
It's a lot.
I mean, that is an expensive ability, in my personal opinion.
No one is using DJ Love It re-edit.
That's good. That's a good number.
Hand and the rest of your enter. Ugh.
Yeah, the correct number of DJ Love It re-edit for this tournament is 0. That is correct.
So, onto the piece. Endless Punchline is in all of the Wolf decks. And the second piece, Future Code.
Ooh.
Yeah, Future Code makes sense here. Future Code, your wolf is pumping up your attackers. Future Code's only requirement is green Elrig and that you have buff dudes on your side. So it's a match.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me. Plus, if I remember correctly, Osagetsune also gives something Lancer.
And it's also,
so
no, it gets a power boost.
Oh, it gives it a power boost.
It gives
But
a
it
power
also
boost,
opens.
and then if you enter charge, pay 2, vanish something.
Yeah, that's
You're
right.
thinking
that's
of
right.
Demeter for the vanish.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry about that. But yeah, I think Future Code is a great fit for this deck. It plays into a lot of what the deck is already doing, and it just kind of gives a little boost right at the end.
Yeah, another way to be like, hey, if you didn't die by that 6 damage I was threatening last turn, now I'm going to threaten on my turn 4. I'll threaten, or I guess turn 3 as well. I'm going to threaten. There's multitudes of ways to threaten 6 damage in a wolf deck. That's all I gotta say.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's honestly surprising that we didn't see more of it, but there's always next ceremony. Prove me wrong, folks. It's one of my favorite things when it comes to this kind of stuff. Prove me wrong. Tell me my opinions are crap, please.
Top. What was it? 3 Utamago freeze. That was super surprising. It happens.
You know, variety is the spice of Wixoss. I say it almost every one of our podcasts, but it's true.
Which, speaking of Tamago, continuing on to Tamago, that freeze deck is a lot more likely than you think looking at these top 5 main deck cards. We have, leading off, why wouldn't you use Random Drain in an Uchu deck? Or as I like to call it, Servant Drain, because I see more servants get discarded off of this card than any other card.
Unless you're running 2 servants.
Alright, you got me there. I got nothing there. Continuing on, Fenrir in all of the decks as well, at almost 4 copies each. White decks do white things. Zhao Yun in 5 of the decks at 4 full copies each. 4th place, Primora in 5 of the decks in a little over 3.5 copies each, and rounding it out with Snowmew in 5 of the decks at almost just shy of 3 copies a deck. Considering this can only freeze the center, if your opponent's anticipating it, they just don't play anything in the center. So that seems to be the correct number.
It is true. You have picked out of the 5 cards, 4 of them say freeze in it at some point. Even the Random Drain, you forget that the Random Drain, that life burst says freeze the Signy.
Down
there it
and
is.
freeze.
Yeah. And Primora, not surprising, it is secretly one of the most annoying cards in the meta right now. It is very good against the aggro decks because you deal with this right now and it punishes them, or you deal with this later and it punishes them. It punishes them either way it goes, and it does the same type of punish. So it's one of the few Punisher cards that you actually like to see.
Yeah.
And it actually is quite secretly good against Nova as well, because having it stick on the field and then just start freezing out Signies can be very bad for Nova, where it wants to have its walls and it doesn't want to enter charge really from the field all that much. And it also is running Komais, so it wants to be able to have all of its Signies upped.
Right, and it's definitely one of those you have to be careful with, because if you kill it in battle, it better be your 3rd attack.
Yeah, it is. You'd be surprised how many times people will attack into Primora. You'll be like, all right, freeze this. And they go, wait, that's what that card says?
Yeah, down and freeze that. I'm not letting you take it back, my guy.
Yeah, I believe the word for it is it's a groan tester. It tests the groans.
Groans?
It's it's a very big knowledge check if you're aware of the other decks in the formats as well.
Yeah, this looks solid for any Tamago type of deck, and I think this is where you want to be at with Tamago. Tamago doesn't necessarily have the raw late game power that Nova does, so it needs to supplement it through its main deck, and Freeze is a good way to do that. And Freeze is surprisingly powerful against Nova. In fact, what I found out when I interviewed Carl for Tamago was that Tamago Freeze is actually another Nova killer. It is it is better against Nova than you'd think it would be.
And I feel the same way about Angels. I'm traumatized by that deck. But we'll discuss that later. On to the assists for Tamago. Your bread and butter bang assists. There's no build-up needed for these, other than the numbers might surprise a little bit. We got bang crescendo in all of the decks, but only in 2/3 of the decks do we see bang de capo. Which
I can understand that. The other choice that you probably make is solo, and that gives something Lancer. And Tamago has a hard time getting damage across the board. So it's not as surprising as you'd think it would be. Although Bang de Capo, aside from having the best art in Wixoss, is also just a rock star.
You're entitled to your opinion, but your opinion is wrong. That's not Miracle Draw. But yeah, that is true. Given Tamago does have the struggle to push offensively, Bang Solo does fit the bill to help push that late game damage. Since you're already freezing most of their stuff anyways, Bang de Capo doesn't really do much, honestly, and ideally you don't want it to do much. So you want to focus on the weaker portions of your deck that need a little strengthening, so the damage output, I could definitely see the Bang Solo, yes. And continuing for Nova Dirty in 5 of the decks, and then we have Nova Slash in 4 of the decks. Which, Nova Dirty, I like Nova Dirty. You're running mostly blue and white anyway, so you've got your pick 2 here. Nova Slash, I like as well.
I agree. It's actually interesting. The Nova Dirty or Mute, by the way, they're both fine cards.
Right.
Nova Slash are actually more used in the Japanese meta around set 5 and forward than you'd expect. And that's because white-blue specifically loves Nova. Aside from the incredible amount of card draw that you get from Nova Dirty, Nova Slash's ability of being able to find you a guard and then also Enter Deny is very well respected in those 2 colors.
Right. Agreed. And then onto pieces. Hanpanai. All the decks. Love this card. It's my favorite card. I had fun story. I had to double take what Kome read because when I first read Kome, because I try not to look at upcoming sets. I just wait for the cards to actually get revealed because I don't like spoiling myself that far ahead. I had to double take and read. It's like, wait, Kome lets me restand my rig? I can make somebody discard 6 cards? Wait, hold on. This part says lose abilities. Never mind. Don't care anymore.
You can still make them discard 6 cards. You just need to have some amount of Hampai, Fenrir, and random drain and do it all at once. Which it's a valid choice to do sometimes because you force people into a Xenocluster territory, and they'll Xenocluster before the Hampai resolves, and you go, yep, and Hampai to finish it off.
Yep. It's like, oh, you got those 3 cards back? Yeah, Hampanai. No longer. Whew. And then continuing the fact that Tamagos, like their freeze builds, great reversal in 4 of the decks. I could see End of the Turn and or Xenocluster being the other 2 decks.
There's quite a bit of leeway as to what you want in your second one, but I do agree Tamago needs the damage output, and so great reversal just kind of ups that clock a little bit. And
it also has that Enter Denial because it trashes versus just vanishing.
Yep, absolutely. And also it's worth noting that great reversal was worse in the last set. It is better in this set because adding Waffle Ice, which also freezes 2, means that you are running anywhere from 4 Fenrirs to 2 to 3 Waffle Ices, 7 options to get your Great Reversal off when you need it. You have way more options with it now.
Right. If you really wanted to, you could run Thrillings too. It's just an on-demand freeze, but I'm not judging that. So, continuing with Uchu decks, Nova. And from what I can see, this is basically the core, and you're going to hear me go on another rant about one of these cards. Like, I don't rant about one of these enough. Kome, in all of the decks, at almost 4 copies each, leading off. In all of the decks as well, Ishikirimaru, in 18 of the decks, at almost 4 copies as well. In 17 of the decks, we have Typo at almost 4 copies as well. The card that I am tired of seeing, because every time I see it happen, the only thing it ever does is draw a card when it is used. Folklore in 17 of the decks at 3.6 odd copies a deck. Finally, I'm going to bite my tongue on a Signy with no abilities. Triumph in 17 of the decks at almost 3 copies each. Triumph makes sense. You want the green for Bang to Capo.
That's exactly it.
You need the green.
Yeah, the Triumph should read. It has no text on it, but it should read, "You feed me to Demeter."
If you don't have servants, you feed me to Demeter or Bang to Capo.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the core of the deck. It's not too surprising. I have flipped enough Falcolores and downed 2, specifically against Nova mirrors to deny them Kome stands. That it still has a place, although I would agree with you. The reign of Folklore, like it was just overtly present in the last ceremony, is gone. It's not quite as high end as that anymore.
Folklore is another one of those similar to what we talked about with Primora. It's a knowledge check. If you are aware of its if your opponent is playing blue, you have to respect it. That's the problem. I hate this card because of how useless it seems sometimes, but you have to respect the fact that it exists, because the last thing you want to do, swing open, you lose your other 2 attacks.
Yeah, and you might be wondering, well, doesn't white have its own Folklore now? Why are we running Folklore instead of that? Or even green, which Nova can play all these, right? The Akufuku or the Rimlight. And the reason, I think, is, aside from Rimlight doesn't down it, aka it's actually worse to play against Komai. Folklore being a level 2 blue is incredibly important for the deck, because sometimes you're waiting on the Decapo, so you need a level 2 on the field, and you still want to push some amount of damage because the clock is real in these ceremonies, that you want to play Demeter, and you need the blue there.
Right. Oh, and with the correction Akafuku, it doesn't stop attacks, it stops damage.
Right. Well, it does the job of protecting your life cloth, is what I meant it for.
Yeah, I mean, Folklore does the same to a degree, yes, but Folklore can protect your Signy as well. Same with Roomlight. Akafuku does not protect your Signy.
That's correct. It also Akafuku Energizes, which generally is considered less important than drawing a card.
Right. So, realistically, Folklore is more so like the knowledge check of just, if you know it exists, you have to respect that it exists, and you don't want to risk it. So a lot of times, yes, it does seem useless, but realistically, your opponent's respecting the fact that it exists, so it's proving some form of use. So, onto the assists. Speeding through these first 2, these are the only 2 assists you'll ever see in a Nova deck, unless something happens drastically that changes people's mind. You have Crescendo and Decapo.
We talked about these, so...
Yeah, we say no more, fam. on it. For the Tamago assist, though, leading out double stroke roll in 14 of the decks and jet stick in 17 of the decks. The other 4 for Tamago, for the level 1 Tamago, I could see it being... What's the other level 1? Symbols? Beating, there we go.
The one that you're talking about, yeah.
Beating. I could see it being beating to open up the early game aggression to try and speed up the clock, because you're already playing a slow deck to begin with. You want to try and speed up that clock of, like, I want to have as many turns as possible to... Or I want to try and push my opponent into a corner as early as possible. So, opening up the lanes in level 1, hell, even level 2, is just a great tempo push, especially considering Nova's main aggression is Lurig attacks after level 3. You're not really doing much with your level 3s once your opponent has, like, 0 life cloth, because unfortunately Demeter doesn't give S Lancer. And for those of you who are not familiar with what S Lancer does, it's Lancer, but instead of it just being crush a life cloth, it damages your opponent.
Which means you can win a game off of it.
Yeah, you can win a game off of this kind of Lancer. You can't win a game off of a Demeter Lancer, unfortunately.
Luckily, I can say, as being one of the statistics here that's on the board, I chose double stroke because the more and more I played Nova, the more and more I was like, I respect the clock, but I need to get guards as soon as possible. There's a huge difference between your win rate of getting guard by turn 1 or 2 versus getting guard 3 or 4 in Nova. And that's why you see the double stroke and the jet stick combo here is they are mostly used to try to get your guards.
Right. So, if you are the statistic, what was your second piece? Were you the one that wasn't running jet stick?
No, I was running jet stick as well. I wouldn't run it. There is one where it can make your opponent discard, and I think it's okay, but I really only think it's okay. I think jet stick is absolutely the way to go.
Right. Agreed. As a fellow Nova player, agreed. So, on to the pieces. Hampanai in all of the decks. No reason not for it to be in all of the decks. It's good. There's not much else that needs to be said about it. And, like you mentioned earlier, surprise, no surprise, end of the turn, but 15 of the decks.
I mean, the fact that end of turn in this specific deck reads, it reads either A, save a life cloth, or B, take back Homai or Demeter from your trash and put it back on the field, is incredible. Literally both of those modes Nova needs.
And the other thing too is, like you said, with both of the nodes, is one of those, like, for example, in the card jockey matchup, if you deplete your opponent's hand severely, and they go for, like, Good Dig or Miracle Draw to try and get their stuff back, you just go, no.
No.
You're going to stay hurting, and now I have 2 slots to hit you with next turn.
Interestingly, I actually reviewed ReplayWorks' match against me specifically, and in round 6, and I think I did that, and I also think it was a mistake. I think I should have held it for his. Inevitably, he used a Eternal Influence, but yeah, it is also a possibility. It's the flexibility of it is incredibly important, and the fact that saving a life cloth is important against aggro matchups and mid-range matchups, and the consistency part is important in control and mid-range matchups, means that it's one of those few pieces that you're like happy to have, and there's no bad time to play it against any opponent. It's always relevant during an opponent, specifically in Nova. I should clarify.
Right.
In Lion, saving a life cloth is not always worth it because you're racing a lot of the times anyways, but again, I'm going to get off my soapbox here.
So, continuing on, the last full team of decks that we have to cover, we still have Diagram, and then the last, still Dream Team Bang. But, continuing on with Diagram, Musica, top 5 main deck cards. I would call this the core of Musica, just like most of these other decks. Is basically identifying the core. Landling, all of the decks, almost 4 copies each, just 0.11 shy of it. Phalaris in all of the decks at almost 3, just a little over 2 copies each. Dark Energy in 8 of the decks at almost 3 copies each. Green Gas in 8 of the decks as well at almost 3 copies each. And finally, Ana Mirage in 8 of the decks at a little over 2 copies each.
Yeah, Ana Mirage and Nobunaga. These are basically the same card almost in their respective colors. Ana Mirage is what Nobunaga is in red to black. So I'm not surprised to see it at basically the same percentage.
Right. And considering, again, the whole Rise thing, you need to have something on the field. Granted, this is a lot less restrictive than Nobunaga. Nobunaga needs to see a red. This just doesn't care. Mm-hmm. It'll take anything. I do agree with the Phalaris being at max 2, running 3, in my opinion, is a little overkill.
Agree. I think it's pushing it.
I mean, it's not like you could realistically put more than 2 down on your field, more than 1 down on your field at any given time because of the harmony effect.
Yeah.
So if you were trying to put 2 down on your field, one of them would have to come in on the down possession. So to have 4 in your deck, you would just be flooding yourself with things that you might not be able to maximize.
I've seen it done. You can do it through a very fancy Ana Mirage Life Burst flip. Because it'll get you 1 from the graveyard, or from 1 from your trash, and then you play 1 on your turn. You've got 2, and that's horrifying when it happens.
That is scary when that happens.
It is. I understand the uptick for this one because Musica doesn't have a great matchup against Nova, and Phalaris is one of the ways that you win the Nova matchup.
Right, because that's going to be about the only way you deal damage to your opponent at that point, because they already have their walls. Phalaris gets over, you're milling half their deck.
Mm-hmm.
Phalaris is 20 cards, right? Or is it 10?
It's 10, but Nova has trouble sometimes using all of its enter efficiently, so it might be half the deck still.
Yeah, that's fair. So it's going to be the one way you do deal damage against Nova. Not to mention, just combined with Landling and Salvage the Future... 30 cards, Jesus.
Yeah. And on this end, it's still not surprising to see Green Gas being one of the top performers in Musica. There's so little good choices for your level 1s that multicolored level 1s end up just being pretty important for your splashes.
Yep.
You need it for Sangha, which, speaking of Sangha, on to the assists. I'm just going to blow through all 4 of these. There's only one number on here that isn't 100%. But Madoka, Say No More, Float and Clap. Sangha is Aerial at 8 decks, but then we have Strike in all 9.
Which is weird, because Aerial is the one that I'm like, when I hear Sangha and Sangha's strong, I'm like, yeah, Aerial. That's the one I think of.
Right. Like... Musica is like one of the most unchanged decks, one of the most unchanged rig decks, in all honesty, because just you don't have anything else better, realistically.
You know, and the crazy thing is when you look in the Japanese meta like a year from now and you see Madoka lists that are Musica lists that are still there, you go, oh, well, this has some new cards in it, and then you read the cards and you're just like, these are just better versions of what we're playing already in set 2. Like, it does not change.
I mean, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, Musica does what Musica does, and that's mid-range pushing damage, and it does it well.
Right. Speeding on to pieces. Salvage the Future, 100% of the decks. Sorry, 8 decks. There was a deck that was not using it. So you're saying 100% for these teams. There's one deck that was not using Salvage the Future. and Xenocluster in 6 of the decks.
I could see one deck being like, you know what? Instead of Salvage the Future, which basically gets me 1 Life Crush, right, for 0 enter, what if I run Nightmare Step, which could potentially just win me the game?
Yeah.
Nightmare Step's a real card.
Yeah, it
Nightmares-
is expensive, but if you run it and you can pay for it, it's pretty devastating.
Right, like most things, if you can pay the cost and it not hurt you, then do it. Just do it.
And Musica running Xenocluster, it is the deck where Xenocluster is most at home. If you read Clap and you read Senga Strike, you realize they're all pretty enter hungry, and you kind of need the enter, so you can't risk being go to the top. Plus, Musica does not draw well off the top, so it needs to preserve having some amount of draw. So if it gets discarded, it's one of its weaknesses.
Yeah, this was one of those decks I would argue for Song of Wixoss, but when you mentioned how enter hungry it is, like, yeah, I could see why I wouldn't use it. Definitely see why I wouldn't use it. And on to Madoka. It's going to be really familiar to another list we saw earlier, and I promise these are 2 different slides. Random Drain in all of the decks at 4 copies each.
Yeah, slightly less random drain.
Gagil in all of the decks at 3 3/4 copies on average. Same goes for Hijikata, 8 decks, 3 7/4 copies a deck. In all the decks as well, Regalicus, 3 and 0.38 on average, and last but not least, Zirconium in 8 of the decks at almost 3 copies each.
Yeah, I was pretty sure you just shuffled Tamago and Ray together until I saw the Zirconium.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, look, Random Drain showing up here is not surprising. Random Drain doesn't need to be used as a team spell in order for it to be good. 1 enter to make your opponent discard a card and you draw a card basically makes it almost free, and it is incredible. Period.
And then the rest of this just plays into the Gagil and the Regalicus just plays into the Hijikata. They're just sitting pretty in between.
Yeah, it is. Zirconium being here basically just takes the place of Firefly, Squid, and Ray. Otherwise, you're seeing the same core.
Yeah.
Hijikata is better in Madoka than it is in Ray, and the reason why is because Senga Aerial gives it Lancer.
Yeah.
It gets big and it can punch through things, and it wants to punch through things for that discard. So yeah, this is the core of Madoka, and this is what basically says Madoka is what it's trying to do.
And it's a good thing we do mention the Sangha Aerial, because in the assists, I'm going to speed through these again because these numbers are extremely close to each other, only 2 variants. Musica Dolphin in all of the decks. Musica Splits in all of the decks. 7 of the decks, reading ahead. Oops. Sangha Aerial in all of the decks. And Sangha Strike in 7 of the decks.
Yeah. Pretty standard.
That, again, there's not real... To me, like, Diagram suffers from, like, it has a lot of decent assists, but the problem is the ones that are primarily used are just so good already. There's no reason to try and... You don't fix what isn't broken.
They're flexible. They're those like workhorses, right? They do the job. They're almost always the right choice. So you can do something cool and special, but realistically, Musica Splits will do the job 90% of the time too.
Right. So, on to pieces. We have Salvage the Future. This time in all the decks, I swear I'm reading this card. I'm reading this correctly. And I would have argued for Song of Wixoss, but as you mentioned earlier, Chime of the Blesky, instant turn on for Hijikata, which you can have 2 turns, realistically, of instant turn on Hijikata because of Madoka's once per game ability being or not Madoka's once per game, sorry, Madoka's enter ability being draw 3, ditch 2.
Chime of the Blesky. Literally the
Yes.
same.
Graceful Charity. Being Graceful Charity.
Yeah. And I'm not also, I'm like I said earlier, I'm not surprised to see less Chime of the Blesky. It's less needed now that you also have Thrilling.
Right. And that's another one of those, just like, there's not really much to talk about in this sense. So, continuing on to Sangha, their top 5 cards, we have Mirai in all 4 decks at 3 3/4 copies each, followed by Lanling in all 4 decks at 3.5 copies each. Osage Tsune in all 4 decks at 3.5 copies each. Water Buffalo in all 4 decks, just shy of 3 at 2 3/4. And last but not least, Imp in 3 of the decks at a little over 2 copies each. Now, this is understandable. Sangha needing to see all 3 colors, it does not surprise me to see cards like Water Buffalo and Imp in the top 5 because that's the fastest way to have 3 colors. These both count for 2 colors. Mirai is basically a dual color Signy as well because you pick any color. You pick any of the colors you don't have, it now has that color.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's pretty bog standard for what this is, but and Senga's new, so it's important to recognize that this is sort of the core of it. I joked a lot about Senga's just, I'm like, oh yeah, you mean it's green Musica, because it does a lot of the same things Musica does. But it is worth mentioning, it has a few differences. And the differences are the fact that it can run Osega Getsune very easily means that it has a better chance at vanishing bigger walls, which as we saw with Nova is more relevant now.
Right.
But also it does well against the discard decks because Senga also technically, quote unquote, draws a card from your enter zone. So you don't get hit by discard nearly as much.
Right, and it's a really easy, as long as you can keep the 3 colors going, it's really easy to recur stuff that gets vanished, just keep that pressure on.
Mm-hmm.
So, assists for Sangha. I don't need to say more about these 2. That should say Madoka Clap.
I think we need to talk about that.
No, he's right. Aki no Bye Bye has been a staple.
It's been a staple.
Things I do in the wee hours of the morning when I should be sleeping instead of, data entry. I promise it's Madoka Clap.
Look, I mean, we didn't talk about it much in the front end, so I'll just say it with one sentence. Madoka Float, Madoka Clap. These are just ways to say I'm blue and I also have an incredible amount of defense. That's it.
The end.
That's it. The end.
I don't know why my brain thought you were going to say I'm blue.
I'm blue. Bada bida.
So for the Musica assists, you have Power Move and in 3 of the decks and Stomping in 3 of the decks. So there is a small variance for Madoka's Musica section.
Yeah, it basically so one of the powers of Diagram is being able to recur Senga Aerial in order to push more damage. You can't do that in Senga because it's the center. So Power Move does its best version of that.
Right. And then there's Stomping just to be able to cement the trying to think of what the word I can't think of the word I'm thinking of here. Sorry. Just to further cement being able to apply that pressure needed for the deck in itself because of that's where you're getting your aggression, is just clearing the field as much as possible. But anyways, that's all for the assists for Sangha. On to the pieces. We have Salvage the Future in all of the decks, and Azure Black Gaia for the last piece of Sangha in 3 of the decks, which I could agree with. It helps with the consistency portion. It gives you a little bit of the... it gives you some of the discard that you need. Or it gives you some of the consistency that you need as one of the ways to recur things from your trash. As well as hindering your opponent. This is the one I was thinking of for the Madoka. I'm surprised this fell off Madoka. Because I'm pretty sure this was the second highest piece for Madoka last ceremony.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's strong. And it still plays exactly where you'd like to. I mean, being able to you're looking to recur your Osa Getsune, right, as much as possible in this deck. So being able to try to grab that back out of your trash, and you have other things too that you can grab out of your trash at the lower levels that will do a similar job, is strong for this type of deck. You want a little bit of gas. Like you're not running so much things like Trouble or Thrilling in this type of deck, but you could run out of gas pretty quickly. So getting a little bit of selection is nice.
Right.
You got to remember, whatever you take out of your trash, put on your field, gets vanished and then ends up in your enter, and you can bring it back with Sanga's ability. So it kind of plays into that cycle of flow.
It does, and there's actually no better way to say that. That's exactly what it does here in the Sangha deck. So we have one more team to go over before we get to the requested stats that I've been asked to compile on top of what I've already done. And there's Bang. Dream Team version. And we're only going to be going over the main deck cards for this because if I remember from my spreadsheet, out of the 4 decks, I had 8 different pieces and I think 12 different assists.
Yeah,
That's a lot of variety.
Yeah, you're gonna get to a point where we're gonna go into a meta where it's mostly Dream Teams, and it's gonna be real fun to try to compile all the data there.
I don't want to think about that. Let's not. I really don't want to think about how I'm going to go about this data stuff when that happens. So just, I don't...
Too soon.
No more simple data. It's just going to become color data at that point. Or center data at that point. Well, I'll figure that out. This isn't the time to gripe about that. So, the top 5 main deck cards for Bang Center for Dream Team. Pandada, number 1, in all of the decks, and at 4 copies each.
Nice.
Strong showing.
Tied for number 1, Hello, my friend, Lancelot, in all of the decks at 4
Lancelot
copies each.
Finally being like, hey, I'm actually part of the core of this one, all right?
Yeah. 3rd place, Fennec, in 3 of the decks, at the 3.67 mark. Same thing for Sita in 3 of the decks at the 3.67 mark. And rounding it off is Osagitsune in 3 of the decks at 3.3 repeating copies per deck. This is basically Wolf with a different center.
Well, that's true. It's you did just say 3 Terra Beasts, and it's worth mentioning that one of those Terra Beasts in the center there, Fennec, does like team pumping, but Bang doesn't have any team pumping in its center ability. So how's it getting its team pumping? And it's probably through a mixture of things, but also probably through some Terra Beast combos.
Right. Not to mention Fennec is one of those... Not to mention, Fennec is another level 3 green Signy that ties into Bang's once per game ability of needing to have 7 cards under her to grant a level 3 Lancer. And since Fennec can clone the power of not just any Signy on your field, but your opponent's field, it's a great way of this is killing whatever it's in front of. It doesn't matter what I put this in front of, it's dead.
Also has a very clever usage of the word base power in it, which means that it can potentially be bigger. If you have Team Pump on your field, it can actually be bigger than pretty much everything. So it's one of the things that you can do. I think it's fun to see that the Pandata here is, unlike all of the other multicolors, which have shown up mostly towards the 5th place, it's 1st place here.
Right. It could be either or in this case, but yeah, it's interesting in a degree of it's probably really heavily needed because, like you said, probably a lot of decks focusing towards that red. They want to make sure they have that red.
Yep. And then Sita here is a interesting thing that you're going to see, and I think it's important to recognize the Sita in this deck because it's starting to affect the meta more than what you think. Sita's got a life burst that says vanish target 8,000 or power 8,000 or less on your opponent's field when it's bursted. The important thing to note for that is pretty much all of Nova's walls are 8,000 or less on the turn that they would attack them and hit that life burst.
Right, because Ishikimaru only gets power on your turn. Or
right.
On your opponent's turn.
And red decks struggle with the walls, so any way to get an opening for a red deck is a payoff. This is something that I think Bang has done more because Bang is just a good stuff deck, so they're sort of pioneering it. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some amount of no limits following suit in the next ceremony.
Yeah. I know from data I've collected prior, Sita was a strong appearance in some no-limit decks already, so I feel like it might start making its full come in once now that there's going to be more testing, we still have one more ceremony before P03 meta is officially over, that we're going to see, we might see a Sita uptick, and we'll see that in next week, actually, as of recording next week. So that's all we have for the top cards for all the decks. Now we're going to go on to the other stats that I've been asking about. I've got 3 different slides covering community requested stats. The one was my sort of thing, just to kind of showcase something, because I know this is a lot of thing, but the other 2 were community requested. First one we're leading off with is the usage of Ereshkigal. This was a new card in P03 that says you have to do this. This isn't optional. You have to put 2 cards from your life cloth into your trash. If 2 cards were put into the trash this way, trash everything on your opponent's field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So keep in mind, only black decks can use this card.
This card is awesome, to be honest.
I looked at this card and said, not with a 9-foot pole.
Ah!
I don't like the idea of taking 2 damage that I'm not going to get the life burst from to clear my opponent's field. Now, it's different if this is the game-winning turn and they're out of ways to stop me.
Mm-hmm.
It's different in that case, but in a vacuum, I would not touch this card with a 9-foot pole.
No. But I'll say this: if I'm playing Nova and I see someone play this on the other side of the field, my heart just sinks because I'm like, oh, I've lost the game.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of going back to what we said earlier, which is this has a high price to pay. I mean, the whole point of this game is to defend your life cloth, and this is telling you to get rid of 2 of it. But when this goes off as a glass cannon, if it is your last resort, it does perform well. So, what are the numbers for the usage on this one?
So, I've got the top 16, 64 in total. So, out of the 3 decks that could use it in top 16, there's only 1 deck using it. Out of the top 64, out of the 13 decks, only 2 using it. And overall, 5 out of the 21 decks that could use it. Now, this does take into account all the Dream Team decks. None of the Dream Team decks were using black. So this is primarily diagram decks that have access to Ereshkigal.
So, yeah, you could read these numbers in a low way, right? There's not a lot of people using it, therefore it's not that popular. Or you could read it in a different way, which is it actually had a pretty high conversion rate from the decks that used it.
Right. So a lot of that's I feel like the 5 is the 16 out of the 21 that didn't use it had the same first initial impression of me and say not a 9-foot pole. Like, they didn't want to risk it. And the other thing could be, too, given the low amount of time, the small amount of time we had for P03 anything, testing otherwise, if people weren't testing on, like, Cockatrice or Tabletop Simulator, with the cards before they could get them, only having a week to figure out, is this card worth it to run? Am I going to risk this card being a dead card, or I just want to go with the tried and true, make a couple changes, not do something so big? So it's entirely possible we do see an uptick of this card going into the next ceremony to deal with the Nova matchup, if Nova is still perceived to be one of those higher appearance decks.
And I think you'll always see the numbers be low on this deck. This is one of those, to circle back to the beginning of the podcast where I said the numbers that you're looking at, this is a one-off, right? This is the one that you're saying, I will enter it away all the games I don't need it, and on the games that it's my out, I will dig for it.
Right. So continuing on, the next card that I was asked to look at the data for is End of the Turn. A lot of people saw this card, or the persons who did request this saw this card a lot, so they want to see, like, why am I seeing all of this? So, top 16 decks, 6 of them were using them. More than likely, Nova. In top 64, 18 of the decks were using it. And then, in total, 29 decks were using this card. Now, these numbers are a little bit bigger than compared to, like, the Ereshkigal, because End of the Turn can be put in anything. It doesn't have a use condition to where it's only limited to what decks can be used. Any deck can use End of the Turn. So this is still a pretty good showing of End of the Turn. It roughly matches the amount of decks that would want to use this card instead of something else, realistically. So these numbers are about what I expected.
What we've always said on our podcast is your first piece that you use should be used to further your game plan, right? It should be integral to your game plan. That's going to be your team pieces most of the times in this current meta.
Right.
And then your second piece should be used to help you secure your win. And if it's not securing your win, it should be something that's flexible to allow you to have some amount of, again, flexibility or ability to win certain games that might otherwise be you're getting attacked in, right? And
right.
End of the Turn falls under that. Same Xenocluster, right? Xenoclusters should be considered with End of the Turn as the pieces that I'm considering using because I have no second piece that absolutely is integral to my game plan. Thus, I want a more flexible game plan. End of Turn and Xenocluster are the two.
Agreed. And speaking of Xenocluster, that is the last slide we will have to go over for all of the data points, and I will also be showing the differences for it from the last ceremony. So going on, the top 16 decks, 3 of 16, 80 at 18.75%. From the last ceremony, that dropped 32%.
Wow.
Top 64, not as a dramatic drop. 14 of the 64, 21.88%. Only a drop of 13.5%. Overall, it was a drop of about 10%. 30 of the 117 decks were using it, about a quarter of the decks. With how much Nova was hyped up, I expected these numbers to be higher.
You know, I honestly do too. Again, I don't think Xenocluster is the be-all like it's sort of preached in the Japanese meta. But I do think that it is, again, if you add that number with what is it called? End of Turn. you probably should be hitting about 50% of the decks. Now, can you tell me overall how much percentage was used for end of turn again?
Yes. End of turn overall was 25%.
And then we found this one's 25%. So if you add those numbers together, that's about 50% of the decks that are running this. And I think that's correct. I think you could link the less usage of Xenocluster and the rise usage of end of turn as a relationship between itself.
That is entirely fair. I actually do agree with that to a degree. But I'm expecting the Xenocluster usage to go up in P04 just from what I know about it and from what I've heard from players in the Japanese meta in the card game server.
P04 has a lot more enter burning than we've ever seen in Wixoss yet. In the same way that 02 brought a new attack angle, which is discard, 04 will bring enter burn, and I am sure as hell that Xenocluster will go up then.
And if it doesn't, DXM is just going to reign supreme. Just saying.
It'll be very surprising.
Yeah. But that is all we have for the data that we have. Last thing, just as a little fun thing. How did you guys enjoy the ceremony?
Well, I liked it a lot. I got 5th place, so I'm pretty happy with the way that it ended up being. But we play the ceremony not necessarily to get prizes or to play. Like, we want to play some of the community, and we also want to see how we rank up. Like, it is important for us to see how we're playing as players.
Yeah, I kind of use the ceremony as like a just to like gauge my skill level. So the prizes aren't quite as important. So this past ceremony was very rough for me, but what made it the most fun for me was playing with some of our subscribers and meeting new players and interacting with the community. That's kind of where I always find I have the most fun.
It's the lifeblood of this game.
It really is.
Right. You can't have a card game without its community.
Yeah.
In a general sense.
Andrew did well though.
I did.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it a lot. It was a good showing for Nova for me, and that was the deck I really wanted to rep. But again, like I look back at my favorite parts of the ceremony. It's not necessarily winning. It really was just like when I turn on my screen and go, "Oh, hey guy, like ready to play," and they'd see the life burst on the playmat, and they'd be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I'm playing you!" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm here. It's fun." And like these are some fun games that we played.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's also probably a big point too. It's is that too. I actually had was actually out one day. Like, this wasn't actually in a tournament, but I was out one day at a shop, and someone recognized my voice for a minute, and they were just like, wait. I watched, did you do this one thing? I'm just like, yeah, why? I'm confused. I didn't know other people knew this in this area. Help.
It's very cool. I mean, like, it's not like, look, we're not big fish here, but the fact that people can generate discussion about this game, and that's the whole reason Tiffany and I started the podcast in the first place, was just to generate discussion. We just wanted a place for people to be able to talk about Wixoss and have fun, and the fact that the tournament was there, and there's been just so many people saying how wonderful it was to just play against like-minded, excited players.
Yeah.
That's the core of this game,
That's the
man.
fun.
Yeah, that is 100. I 100% agree there. So, I know from my end on the commentating spectrum, I promise I'm not getting on you, Andrew, when I say this, because I know this happened to you. Can people please read their cards?
It's true. You're not wrong. That's why I made the joke literally every time I harmonied after that, where I gave a thumbs up to the camera, because I was like, "Yep, I know, I made a mistake. Here we go."
Like,
Yeah.
this is just me. I griped about this on another video that I did, and I'll do it again. Folks, I know the judges don't like telling people to rewind stuff, and I would hate to hear someone try to call a judge because their opponent wouldn't let them play a harmony cost after they've done something after playing the card with harmony. Like, I'm going to say it once, and I'll say it 100 times. If you play a card with harmony and then proceed to do something else after you played the card with harmony, your opponent is within full rights to ask you to down the card with harmony if you do not pay the cost.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, my game was a bit of an exception because my opponent was super super happy to be like, let's talk about it on stream. Let's have the announcer say what happened so that way people don't make these mistakes. And you know what? That is part of the game too. Is seeing these people make these mistakes and be like, yep, not time to not make those. And try to play as cleanly as possible. Look, man. I tap every harmony cost now within seconds of me playing that card. So it's a learning
lesson,
experience,
But we're going to wrap it up here. I know with recording, I have to get to work. So this that's going to be edited out. No, it's not. It'll be in. It'll blooper. Just like, Madoka clap. I mean, Madoka bye-bye. I mean, Akino clap. Whichever one. Anyways, thanks you guys for joining me. This took a lot longer than I expected, but I hope you enjoyed yourselves. And like I said before, I have all the data to the ceremony in a link in the description below. Shows all the card averages for what we didn't talk about amongst. It has all the deck lists too. So if there was like a deck list you want to see that, or if you're looking for specific decks, it has all the decks there that were played in the ceremony. So, like I said before, thank you guys for joining. Loved having you guys.
Thank you so much for having us.
anytime.
This is great.
And I'll also have I'll have a link to their content below. Their content's fantastic. I listen to it on the way to work, sometimes at work. So give them a listen if you haven't already. Folks, I will see you guys at the next data point for the presentation. And if you guys are playing in the next ceremony, good luck to you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll see you there.